Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, legends. Welcome aboard the good ship Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Today we're setting our virtual sail for the not too distant future. And the good news is there's room aboard for everyone. Today we're checking out a couple of encouraging new developments in hydrogen-powered transport. It appears that the seal has burst open and the sky is the limit there. We'll clear some of the fog of rhetoric to check out how China is moving forward to cope with its national energy crisis. And of course, we'll open the AI grab bag once again to see what gifts are on offer this week. But here to bring us all the news about the latest and greatest, it's Matthew Dickerson. What's been happening in your week, Matt?
Well, the same has been happening in just about everyone's week. We're recording this just after the largest global IT outage ever.
Yeah.
So didn't that cause some chaos?
Yeah.
So the latest and greatest, maybe it's the latest and the worstest, because this is exposing the underbelly of what could happen. Now, of course, this was all painted as a mistake, and I'll get to a little bit more of that in a moment, but maybe it wasn't a mistake. That's a possibility that this is a test run, but it just goes to show how interconnected our world is, and then the ramifications of one potential problem suddenly starts to lead to the breakdown of society as we know it. That sounds a bit dramatic, I know, but when you start to get to the point where you can't pay for things, that becomes a bit of an issue. When airlines stopped flying because they couldn't have people check in.
Well, I had a niece who just flew out for Europe just like maybe an hour before it struck. So they messaged her and said, "Oh, do you know anything about this?" I had no idea what was going on at all.
Well, and I was thinking about it. I was thinking I'd rather be on the ground saying your flight's delayed than being in the air going, not sure if things are working correctly at the moment, but what things could have happened. For example, air traffic control. Now, they put out an announcement to say, we're okay. The main problem with the airlines was being able to check in, and I'm sure you saw photos on social media of people with handwritten check-in notices back like the old days where you'd tick off passengers on a piece of paper and get them to come through. But so many things just rely on our system. Now, the basic premise here of what happened essentially was one company in the cybersecurity space has a large market share. So CrowdStrike, they talk about maybe a 17% market share. That's pretty impressive. If you've got a 17% market share across the world in anything, then you go, yeah, we're going pretty good. We're a pretty advanced company and we've gotten into a lot of the marketplace. But of course, you have a problem with that particular company, then 17% of people across the world are affected. And I think that's generally what happened here. One of the issues I find fascinating, though, is way back many years ago, we used to have this thing about Microsoft updates. And every day, there was a certain day of the week that Microsoft updates came out. Every time that happened, you'd expect there'd be some people somewhere with some little problems caused by a Microsoft update because they didn't get something just right or it had caused some issue in another program. It's very hard to test for all the different programs that might have been running on a PC running a Microsoft operating system. So sometimes the testing you felt like was just put it out there. I'm sure there's more testing than that, but put it out there and see if that caused some problems. And then they'd fix updates. So they were patches that were fixing other problems. And I know I had some clients at the time that said, whatever you do, don't roll out the patches as soon as they're available because I keep hearing about these problems caused by patches. Now, of course, the patches are trying to fix the potential problems, but sometimes they cause some problems. This particular scenario was similar to that in that CrowdStrike were just doing a normal update. They have to make sure they're ahead of the game, fixing patches, fixing holes, fixing problems as soon as they become aware of them or trying to be preemptive to stop all the people out there that are trying to hack or trying to get into your systems. Obviously, in this scenario, they've rolled that out with some error, some minor error. Now, again, it's very new when we're talking about this now. I can't tell you the details of that error. I'm not sure what we'll ever find out about exactly what that was. I'd love to know about the process they have to check those before they roll them out. Whose job is it to check that? That's my job. What happened to this? We haven't had a problem in the last 50, so I just let it go. Or maybe they checked it but not in the right environment. Or maybe I actually find this thing sometimes, if you've got, just say a simple document that's got to go out, and it's being checked just for spelling and grammar. So we're not talking about worldwide global outage. We're just talking about making sure it's correct. Sometimes when it goes through 4 or 5 sets of hands, you get an error that propagates all the way through. And I think what happens is the first person that looks at it says, I'll have a quick glance. I'm not going to check it properly because it's going to be checked down the line.
Yeah.
as it goes for each person, they go,
well, it's already been checked by one.
That's right, it's already been checked by 3 or 4. I'll have a quick glance.
Yeah.
Gets to the end, goes out to the big wide world, and then, hold on, you've got a spelling error or a grammatical error.
Yeah.
Oh, well, why didn't anyone pick that up? It might be as simple as that. And when I say simple as that, I'm sure CrowdStrike's got better processes in place than just everyone have a bit of a look at it, will you? But this is the problem. So here we go. We roll out an update. So if you were running a PC that was using CrowdStrike, which 17% of the people across the world were, then, well, no, that's not quite correct because it only affected PC. So we're not talking about Macs or other operating systems here. But if you were one of those, you had a problem immediately on your screen. But if you weren't running CrowdStrike, and so, for example, in a couple of environments I work in, I don't use CrowdStrike. But, for example, a cloud exchange server. So your email might be using CrowdStrike. So your computer's working fine. You go to send an email and it says, hold on, I can't connect to your email server. What's going on there? So it could be something like that where your cloud provider of some software, and email is the simplest one I can think of, that might have been affected, and that's where some of the FPOS facilities. So, for example, your point of sale system might have been fine. You might run a local point of sale system. You might run a cloud one that's not using CrowdStrike, but that's all fine until you go to process the transaction. That bank you're then using might be using CrowdStrike. Are people in the future now going to say, if I sign up to this cloud provider, can you tell me if you're using CrowdStrike or not? Because that's obviously damaged their reputation. But it does show you. So if I was a international hacker for hire, I might be going to a government now saying, you know what, we've just worked out a better way to attack the systems across the world. Go and attack the people that are protecting the systems across the world. If we can make a difference there, wow, look what happened with CrowdStrike. So is this going to happen again? Who knows? What redundancy can we put in place? You'd have to have some fairly advanced redundancy systems to make sure you've got things away from that entire ecosystem you're running there. Do you run a parallel cloud-based program suite that's using different things? How do you even know? Do I have the ability to know from my cloud provider what cybersecurity software you're using? Is that any of my business as a user of your software? So there's all these questions there. We will find out answers, maybe not all of them, but we'll find out more and more answers over the next few weeks. But it just shows you in an interconnected, globalized world, that's fantastic. We've gotten more efficiencies out of that, but gee, we also have some more risks, don't we?
Well, I think from an anthropological sort of point of view as well, how we cope in times of stress is a really, really important thing because we become so dependent on these things, and when things don't run perfectly smoothly, we drop our bundle, and things didn't run perfectly smoothly for time immemorial. Yeah,
that's right.
So. We with the way our coping mechanisms when things didn't work so well in the past were a lot better, I want to suggest. Maybe.
Well, it's interesting.
And we've just become so dependent that when something goes wrong, it's just right. Everything goes wrong.
Yeah, and I was watching the news and they had some interviews, for example, at the supermarket and at the airport and things. Yep. And there were people sitting around like the airport, how frustrating, you're about to catch a plane. Is it going to fly or not? Do I go back home or not? Or I'm about to go back home, my motel, I've checked out. So you've got all these issues to deal with. And so most people were saying, oh, look, we're just waiting around. We'll see what happens. One guy on there, he was really angry. And I'm thinking, I can understand you might be angry, but who are you angry with? Yeah. Did someone at CrowdStrike say, okay, Mr. Billy Bloggs sitting there at Melbourne Airport, I'm going to make his day unpleasant. I'm going to make the airlines be delayed by doing this little thing here that might affect the rest of the world as well. Like, I don't think anyone has deliberately done this.
Yeah,
so it's
we
hard
all
to
needed
get really
a pack
angry.
of chill pills in our pocket, didn't we?
That's right.
Yeah. But what I think evolution, the social evolution will be, what do we do? This will better prepare us perhaps for our systems to back up when a system collapses.
And I've been involved in creating disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans for various organisations focused on the IT side of it. Most of the time you're doing that, you're focused on the internal network. So if your server crashes, if there's a fire at your office and the server catches on fire, so you're mostly focused on that. If your internet connection is corrupted, what's your immediate backup plan? How do you go and choose another provider? If your provider goes down across the nation, how quickly can you get connected with another provider? All these sort of redundancy plans. Yeah. I don't know many redundancy plans that I've been involved with anyway that have said, if the internet goes down across the world, what's your backup plan?
Yeah.
Because you're kind of going, well, do we create another internet? How do we
There's
do
a lot
that?
of people out there trying to promote not removing cash from society and making sure that we keep cash in society. I wonder how their argument will go now.
For the next 4 or 5 years, they'll be saying, remember CrowdStrike?
Yeah.
We need cash because of CrowdStrike. So.
And maybe they've got a point. Okay. All right. Okay. It's time to get moving. If you're all excited about the idea of colonising Mars like I am, and you fancy a bit of space travel, this first story may give you just a little pause for thought. Well, when you're travelling long distances in space, possibly travelling off to far planets like Mars, where there is nary a drop of water, you've pretty much got to take it all with you and be very careful not to spill a drop. You're on stage 7 water restrictions. But when absolutely every single drop counts, all the water, that is all the water, needs to be recycled. Matt, the thought of drinking recycled urine may be enough to have some people reconsider their life choices. But the latest design in spacesuits can do some pretty nifty tricks.
It can. And of course, so often we find that people see something in fiction, in the movies, in cartoons, and they go, hold on, we could do that. And I think this has been a little bit inspired maybe by the movie Dune, the 2021 movie Dune, where they had their still suits, and their still suits captured all of their moisture, their perspiration, their urine, all the rest of it, and reuse that because of the water scarcity. This isn't quite the same. These are still spacesuits, and in the past, spacesuits have used what's known as a maximum absorbency garment, a MAG. Now, that's a really nice way of saying a nappy. Because if you said to an astronaut, by the way, when you go for that spacewalk, you're going to be wearing a nappy, it mightn't sound quite as exciting or really something you want to jump onto. So a mag, you've got to put your mag on. That's a cool thing, whatever that is. This here is basically a concept where they're saying, exactly as you said, we need to preserve all the water we've got for convenience when you're in space, but also for necessity as you go in space. So Cornell University has been working on this. And they've got a forward-reverse osmosis unit. A forward-reverse just sounds like back to where you started, doesn't it? Go forward, go back, and that's where you come from.
There's got to be meaning in there somewhere, I'm going to guess.
Something like that.
Yeah.
They've got a vacuum-based external catheter, and basically they collect your urine, and they can take that through for you to drink that. 87% they can get from whatever you produce to be able to be drunk. They can do that in under 5 minutes.
Wow.
So if you're thirsty and you need to go to the toilet, well, go to the toilet, and 5 minutes later, at 87% efficiency, you can be drinking your urine, which is now no longer urine.
So it's water.
It's water, that's right.
And we've got to also consider that a large amount of water that is drunk today from your tap, from those bottled water, its origin has been through an animal's body.
Somewhere.
Probably a human's body.
Probably more than one.
Yeah. And so a lot of people go, I can't drink that. And in times of drought, I know that Toowoomba and I think Goulburn had some major issues, and it was put to their the townsfolk, would you be prepared to drink recycled water as an option when their dams were drying up? And I think the vote was complete no. It was
which is interesting because we do it, you say, through history, through all the different animals that water's been through. We're not creating new water, it's the same water.
Yeah.
But we're probably doing it a bit
part of the
more.
water cycle.
That's right. We're probably doing it a little bit more localised than that because we've got rivers.
That's right.
And many towns and cities along rivers take water from the river to put it through a water treatment plant. But upstream of that, there's probably been a sewage treatment plant. So it's not just urine going into the river there.
Yeah.
It's been treated, sure, but not to a drinking standard.
But people don't like the idea of such a short step.
That's right, yeah. If it's 50 kilometres up the river, it goes in and it's diluted and that's okay.
With stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Mixed with other cow poo in the river system.
Yeah.
So this is quite fascinating.
It's a hard one to sell, though, because it's such a short and direct sort of a step. But anyway.
Well, 50 kilometres up the road compared to straight out of your body into your body.
Yeah.
But the system they've created can deliver half a litre of potable water in that 5 minutes. So that's a fairly big wee. I don't know that I wee that much when I go. I haven't measured it, but I don't know that it's that much in one wee. But half a litre, I could urinate half a litre, and then 5 minutes later, I could be drinking half a litre. Over half a litre, that's a problem. But up to half a litre, they can process that. Now, astronauts are probably a little bit more used to this. I'm not sure if they're more comfortable with it, but they're more used to it because the International Space Station has been doing recovery of all the water in there, including urine, for years. They've got about a 98% water recovery rate, but they've got a fairly large device on the ISS that does this. It feels a bit different somehow that it's all in one your suit. That's right. So it does.
If you're drinking that water and it's warm.
Well, that's even worse, isn't it? I hadn't thought of that. Yes, that's terrible.
Now, 5 minutes is enough for it to go cold,
but
surely.
Surely. They maybe got some cooling in there somewhere. But I also think you could use this same technology for areas that we have that have got a scarcity of water on Earth.
Absolutely.
But also in a disaster, when you have something like a tsunami come through or something that knocks out water supply for whatever reasons, for example, a global IT outage might be one example, one reason.
In times of drought when your dams dry up.
That's right. So go to the toilet over here. Maybe every household will have one. Go to the toilet over here, just for number ones, not number twos, and we'll just put that through into the fridge and you'll be right with that 5 minutes later. So technology is wonderful.
Get ready for it, folks. It's coming.
That's right. Technology is wonderful, but whether or not we're comfortable with it, I don't know.
Famous for their two-wheeled stand-up self-balancing transporters, Segway have branched into electric bikes. You may not have known this. The E300 SE has the super cool scooter design of a Vespa, and it'll get you cutting through the city traffic like butter. These silent little electric bikes have got some muscle and will waste no time on your morning commute for that special delivery. Matt, if these things don't literally take off in the city, I will stand stuffed.
And I do like the fact that Segway, the founder of Segway, is no longer with us, unfortunately, but Segway started off with a revolutionary device. And I actually remember the Segway. It came out at the end of 2001, December 2001 it came out, and I happened to be at a Microsoft conference in July 2002. I'd heard about these things, read about them, and at a Microsoft conference you've got 15,000 or thereabouts people from around the world, and you've got a trade stand hall like you wouldn't believe. Everyone pushing their products, and everyone is trying to attract people to their stand, and there was a company there that had a Segway. And so that attracted me to that stand. I have no idea. I can't remember what they were selling, what the product was, but I remember they had a Segway.
Go on that, sir.
And I went over and said, can I go on there? Oh, no, it's just here for us to show off for our staff. I'm going, what? You've got it here and you haven't. Anyway, finally he said, come back after the main lunch break when there's no one around, and we'll just sign some forms and then we'll let you have a little go on it. And so I think he just made up some forms in the meantime. I signed something that said, yep, I'm responsible for my own death or whatever. And I had a go 20 minutes up and back, and I went, this is unbelievable. How wonderful a concept this is.
They were a real novelty when they first came out, but are they still around? Do people?
I've been through Paris, for example. You do Segway tours in a lot of places around the world. They'll do e-bike tours. They'll also do Segway tours. So they still are around. Yeah. And I know my kids couldn't ride them somewhere I went to, and so we found some off-road track where the kids were allowed to ride them because they couldn't ride them out where there was traffic around. Right. But this off-road track, so we found these ones with big knobby tyres on them, and there was an off-road track with jumps. They weren't really jumps, they were like large mounds. But there's this off-road track, and I remember I've got a picture of one of my kids, probably 12 or maybe even younger at the time, riding this off-road Segway around this dirt track. So they're still around. Yeah. I think they're still a novelty, but the technology in those is absolutely wonderful. So Segway, the company, has probably said, well, we've got a reputation, we can do other things. So exactly as you said, they've got a Vespa style, a moped style, but they've said, we don't want to just do a basic old moped style the same as everyone else. Let's do it to a modern standard. So they've made it electric, fantastic, but they've made it for the modern commuter, and I love this. First of all, it's got some acceleration. 0 to 50 in 2.9 seconds. Now, we often talk about 0 to 100 with electric vehicles, for example. You probably don't want to get straight to 100 for your commute around the city. You're not really getting to 100 k's an hour.
And this thing's going to throw you, it's going to butt you off the back too if you're not careful.
You've got to hold on, that's right. So you want to hold on to it. Now, to give you an idea, some of the cars that we talk about, some of the very powerful EVs that are doing 0 to 100 times in the low 3 seconds, maybe even below that, they're 0 to 50 times, and I'm talking about Tesla Model 3 Performance, for example. They're 0 to 50 times, or maybe 1.2 seconds, so pretty quick. This does 0 to 50 in 2.9 seconds, which isn't quite as quick as those EVs, but still pretty impressive, and still for most cars out on the road that are doing 0 to 100 times in 7, 8, 10 seconds, at the traffic lights, you're going to be way in front of them. So not that we're encouraging people to speed and risk their lives, but to get away from
at the lights.
That's right. But to get away from them, you'll be having someone sitting there in their nice V8 high performance rumbling engine in their car sitting beside you at the traffic lights looking across with some disdain at your Vespa-style bike you're on, and then while he's still sitting there chuckling away at this pathetic person beside them, the lights go green and he wouldn't see you again because there's no way he or she would keep up with this little bike. So
and perfectly silent too, just zipping along in your own, little quiet little bubble there, yeah.
And I do ride motorbikes from time to time, and they do get, when you're on the open road, they do get noisy. You just run it, it's just, and it's a bit noisy. So they're quiet. They've got a range. They come with either 2 or 3 batteries. They come standard with 2. You can add a third battery to them. So your range is about 82 kilometres with the 2 batteries or 130 kilometres with the 3.
That's fine if you're going around in the city, yeah.
Well, that's exactly the point. They're not designed to be travelling out from Perth to Sydney. They're designed to get you to work and back home from work in an efficient manner, in a quiet manner, good for the environment.
Sorry if anyone's ever seen someone on a moped crossing the Nullarbor Plain.
Maybe
even a petrol-powered moped. Yeah.
Maybe not.
So, these are things designed for urban traffic.
They are. And they've only got a top speed of 105 kilometres an hour. Again, you're not trying to do that around the city. Most of the time, you're crawling along at 10, 20, 30 kilometres an hour. Yeah. So more of these in cities would be fantastic. In some very congested cities, you see lots of push bikes and motorbikes. We don't seem to do it that much in Australia. There's lots of cars. And I was in Sydney just the other day and I looked around thinking about this story and I saw all the cars around me and I could not see a car with more than one person in it. Sitting there at traffic lights, I saw probably 10 or 15 cars around me. No single car had more than one person in it. So you think, well, we've got a lot of space taken up for one person. Put all those people on a little motorbike, a little moped-style motorbike, then it sounds pretty impressive. They've got all the latest things you'd expect. They've got over-the-air updates. You can generate a code to let someone else ride the bike, so you can use your phone and say, oh, James, you need to use that today. Sure, it's at so certain address. You don't need a key. You just go there and pick it up, and I've sent you the code on how you actually can get on and ride it.
Yeah,
so
wow,
all these
awesome
things that you'd expect to see in a modern vehicle, they've got all that, but more importantly, cheap, about $9,000 you'd pay for it, and again, a great way to get around in a congested city.
Well, I wonder if it'll be something that sort of takes off in some of these countries where the motorbike travel is normal. Like, I wonder how well they will take off there.
And the batteries are removable, so when you charge them up, it doesn't matter if you can't find a charge. If you've got to park your motorbike on the street, for example, some people complain about that with an EV. You just pop the batteries out, take them inside, plug them into a power point. Next morning, put it back in, away you go again.
There you go. Now, AI has its stamp on almost everything these days. For kids born after 2020, they'll never have known a world without AI as a normality. For busy parents of young kids, any reprieve from the hectic world of raising a family is probably going to be met with open arms. Perhaps even an opportunity to hand off the responsibility of story time to a cuddly little AI talking teddy bear called Poe. Matt, cute and super useful, or just a little bit creepy?
A lot creepy.
But there have been movies all through the 80s and 90s made about this sort of stuff.
Exactly right.
And it always goes bad for them.
It does go badly, doesn't it? I used to make up stories for my kids and I used to say to them, give me, I think there'd be a character or a scene or a random word. I don't know why. And when my kids listen to this, there'll be some memories coming back, hopefully, but they always used to want sugar in their stories. And so I thought it was a bit boring with sugar, the condiment sugar, or the sweetener sugar. So I came up with Sugar was a bad guy. And so Sugar had a bad voice and Sugar would do terrible things and you had to pour water on Sugar to get rid of him because he'd then dissolve and all the rest of it. So but I struggled. After many months, years of all these stories that you'd make up and story time, they said, Dad, make up a story.
It challenges your creativity to be able to write a story on the spot.
It was always about Sugar. It was always, oh no, what am I going to come up with? I've got to come up with a different ending. It was always a lot of pressure on me for me to come up with some story that was interesting, and I probably used up all my scenarios in the first couple of weeks and then I just started being a bit more creative. So you've now got Poe, the AI storyteller. So it's the first stuffed toy that uses AI to generate and read stories to children. So it doesn't just generate them, it reads them. And a bit the same as what my kids used to do. The kids choose a character or characters, they choose an object or objects, and they choose the setting for the story. Give it 30 seconds, then using its AI, and it's basically using ChatGPT. So it uses ChatGPT, comes up with a story. 11 Labs that we've talked about several times. 11 Labs is used to generate the voice, and then it will come back and tell a story to the children. you can do things like, I don't want these stories to be too scary. So depending how old your kids are, if you've got 3-year-old, 4-year-old kids, you say, turn down the scariness. If it's 10 or 12-year-old kids, you might say, turn up the scariness.
Up to 12.
That's right. They do have guardrails, they call them, in place to just stop stories being inappropriate. So you don't have a sex worker come and be part of your story, for example. That's probably not appropriate for your 12-year-old kids or your 5-year-old kids for that matter. So you've got things in place. I would be fascinated to see some of the testing just to see that none of these things happen that we're trying to protect against. You don't want to have some of these things come in the stories. But essentially, you've got enough credits when you first buy this particular stuffed toy to create 75 stories. And then presumably the model is you'll pay for the stories after that. But every story is different. Every story is involving their characters and generating on that. So it's almost like you've got a different seed to start the generation and then a different story. You can change the length. I want a 2-minute bedtime story. I want a 5-minute bedtime story. And you sit back and the story just goes and tells the story to the kids.
Wow.
It sounds interesting and scary, more scary than interesting, I think, at this stage. And we do outsource a bit of our parenting. I like to think that I was a fantastic parent, the best parent ever. How much time did I ever let my kids sit in front of a TV and watch something, and I said that was okay for my kids. So we all outsource.
When those
parenting.
little personal DVD players came out, there was a lot of judgment going around. But we all know that our parents back in the 80s, if they had access to a personal DVD player, personal TVs, they would have given them a flogging back then.
We would have been on it, absolutely right. So it's interesting. I think more will come out. I think there's certainly an attraction to make people feel more comfortable. There's no microphones that you can talk to it. There's no cameras in it, so you're not able to be spied on as such. It's not designed for that. The only complaint, when I read a few reviews on it, the only complaint I heard was that some of the language was maybe a little bit complex. So they were using words that were a bit too big for kids to understand. So maybe you need to tone down the language vocabulary because some of the kids don't know some of the larger words that might be available because obviously ChatGPT has got all the words ever known to mankind.
Right. Yeah.
But the other thing is 20 different languages. So if you've got kids that are multilingual or you've just got kids
if you're trying to develop multilinguality.
Yeah, that's right. See if you can understand this story, kids. So fascinating and scary. Let's see how that develops.
Bursting across the new horizon of clean, heavy transport in 2024, the FLIRT H2 is a hydrogen-powered train, and it's all set to get rolling this year in the US. Matt, this is no slouch on the rails. This is set for zero emission on long-distance passenger and freight.
Whatever they need to use it for. This is starting off with passengers, but the FLIRT H2 holds the world record for travelling non-stop by any train, powered by any mechanism, for 2,804 kilometres.
Yeah, wow.
So not too bad. Now, they're introducing this, in San Bernardino County in California between San Bernardino and Redlands, which is only about 15.5 kilometres. So you've got a train that can do 2,800 kilometres. But
you're
obviously,
tying its legs together.
That's right. You're starting off on a smaller route. Presumably they could go for a long time without refuelling it. They could just keep going back and forth. Yeah. But this is the start of testing. Now, my personal view is that we will see more hydrogen-powered vehicles, whether they be trains or trucks, for example, on long haul. Electric buses, trains, trucks going long distances, I think are going to be not the method of the future. I think we'll see hydrogen. And hydrogen, I've been in hydrogen vehicles, hydrogen basically feels, acts, looks a lot like an electric vehicle. The difference is instead of a big battery to get you a certain distance, you've got a very small battery and you've got hydrogen that's being used to power that battery, to produce electricity, to power the battery, to power the car. So it drives like a normal EV. It's got all the same features. And in fact, they can retrofit vehicles that are set up for EVs and you replace a lot of the battery with hydrogen. The big issue is, of course, storing the hydrogen, storing enough hydrogen, high pressure, cold temperatures, for example, to store enough hydrogen. That's a bit of the challenge. In a train, you've got space. In a truck, I'm talking about a long-haul truck, semi-trailer, you've got space as well. But train definitely has got space to store hydrogen, which is why they could probably go 2,804 kilometres.
And the assumption is this would be super quiet.
Super quiet. And we know for decades we've had trains that have been electric trains and they've generated the power they need by diesel. So diesel electric train is a common style of train because a train is a perfect scenario where you want all that torque available from zero. So when they've done various testing experiments over the years, they found that having an electric motor to drive the train from zero and then some way to get power to it is better. So now instead of using diesel electric, you might use hydrogen electric. You might even use battery electric for some scenarios, but hydrogen is definitely the way it's going to go. These aren't far away. These are going to start operations, and the information I read said in the fall of 2024. Now, I hate how Americans in particular, say fall rather than actually naming a time frame, because fall is different in different parts of the world. So it's not a universal way of saying, oh, that's going to start at a certain time frame. When someone says that's going to start in fall, you say, in which part of the world, you're talking about. So it doesn't make sense. If you think it's going to start in fall, just say September this year or whatever it might be. I don't think we do that in Australia that much, do we? Do we say things are going to happen in summer or in winter?
No, it tends to be given a month, I
think.
Yeah,
or it might say first quarter of the year, but we tend to talk about more definitive timeframes rather than saying things are going to start in the spring.
Well, I guess if you give a season, it gives you a range of 3 months, doesn't
You're
it?
cheating, aren't
So,
you?
So
when I said fall, I meant the
and
end
when you're
of
a little
fall.
bit late for it, and people go, well, we're overestimated or underestimated or whatever.
Yeah. So anyway, the fall of 2024, so let's make it more definite, around September, sometime, maybe in the next 3 months after September, you'll find that these will actually start operations. Now, in France, they've already been introduced one hydrogen train on the France's Alstom. You've got the US Coast Guard approved hydrogen-fueled ferry. It's called Sea Change. Very clever there. Good on you, US Coast Guard. So they've got that around San Francisco. So you are finding that hydrogen is going to be a good alternative source for, I think, a range of different things. Ships, haven't seen a lot of that yet, a little bit of it, but I think ships will be definitely one. But you've only got a certain amount of storage space on a ship, and you want to store all your goods you're putting on that ship in that storage space. So taking up a lot with hydrogen tanks mightn't be great, but I think we will see this.
Here's an interesting thing, and I'm just spitballing here, but you've got access to a lot of water when you're driving a ship. So I wonder if you could save space on a hydrogen tank by just producing your own hydrogen as you go.
Yeah, but you need power to do that.
You do,
so where are you going to get power from to do
that?
that?
Okay, that's spitballing. Okay, put that away. Perpetual motion is not going to happen.
We take the water in, we turn hydrogen, we keep going forever. So anyway, keep an eye on this
solar
one.
Power, solar. Anyway, that's for another time.
That's right. And it doesn't say, from what I've understood, and I don't have a number to quote for you here, but what I've understood when you talk about producing green hydrogen, because all of these things are relying on green hydrogen. You don't want to go and burn or create a bunch of CO2 to create hydrogen that then say we're saving the world. It seems like it's fairly power intensive to actually create hydrogen from water. So a good idea, but we'll keep working on that. Anyway,
time.
Hydrogen trains definitely happening. Hydrogen long haul things are definitely happening around the world.
And not prepared to be outdone, Joby Aviation have produced hydrogen-powered jet planes that are capable of mid-range distances with zero carbon emissions. Matt, it's clean air in the skies ahead.
It is, and I'm not sure they're jet planes. I think they're propeller planes.
Sorry, my apologies.
Yep. So I'm pretty sure they're taking props and motors that would run on those and then saying, let's do that on hydrogen.
But when we say mid-range, we're talking more than 100 kilometres, but not, the 1,000 you can't do across the Pacific yet.
That type of thing, exactly right. And I think this is the sweet spot. It's a long way away, I think, before we're getting planes going from Sydney to LA that are using something other than jet fuel of some description. Because you just need to be able to store all that on that plane. Like, I still find it fascinating. I'm sitting on a plane sometimes and I go, wow, we've been up in the air for 12 hours. Someone had to put enough fuel in this plane to get it, forget all the fascination of getting up in the air in the first place, but enough fuel in there, we can just keep going for 12 hours. I can't do that in my car, whatever type of car I'm driving. That's fascinating. So jet fuel, because it's got high energy density, you need somewhere to store that. When you talk about batteries on planes to go long haul, I've done the calculations to start going the distance you need, and it gets to the stage where you just cannot get the weight of the plane, that sheer mass you've got with the batteries you need. So it becomes then you add more batteries to get more distance. More batteries needs more batteries to produce the power to keep it going with the extra weight. So it becomes this whole calculation that is spiraling out to nowhere, because the more you add weight, the more power you need, and then you need more weight to produce that, and away you go. But when you talk about short flights, when I'm talking about 300-400 kilometres, that type of distance, below that, I think we'll be using battery-powered planes to do those distances. The mid-distance, though, and I'm thinking of Melbourne, Sydney, in the top 5 typically each year for the most popular route in the world. That's the sort of distance I think we'll be doing with something like hydrogen. And Joby, they've got a VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, just completed an 843 kilometre test flight. So we're talking about those type of distances, going that mid-distance. Now, that's with a VTOL. It's probably more efficient with a normal fixed-wing aircraft rather than a VTOL, so you'll probably get more efficiency out of that. So all this testing is really just seeing, can we get to the stage where we'll be able to have hydrogen planes up in the air sometime in the near future? And absolutely,
I wonder what that sounds like. We've hopefully all of us have sat in a plane listening to those rotors go and the propellers and the noise that's generated from that. But that's a lot of motor noise as well, I'm going to assume too, not just the wind rushing.
Yeah, I'd love to know the percentage of how much of that noise we sit there in the plane and listen to is the motor. And how much is just, there's a lot of wind there. You're moving just in small aircraft, in a 74-seat Q400, you're moving 29 tonnes of aircraft just moving on the ground to begin with, then moving it fast enough to get airborne. That takes a lot of wind.
Super loud.
Super loud, that's right.
Yeah.
So when you then get an electric version, and I've seen an electric version of a very small VTOL and seen some testing of it nearby, and you hear, it's like a drone noise, so it's a different noise, but it's still noise. But you don't hear the engine throb as such. So you're probably getting a slightly higher pitched noise, and it's a different noise, but it's certainly quieter without a doubt. So these will be quieter. They've been doing some retrofitting as well, because they've had some electric systems that they've been using in Joby. They've had some short-haul VTOLs they've been working with, and then they've been working on the concept of retrofitting, removing some of the batteries, putting liquid hydrogen fuel tanks in the system, into that system. So they've been doing some testing with that, and they've been finding that, yes, they can do that. So I don't think it's that far away. I think within the next decade, we'll be on both an electric plane and a hydrogen plane to move some of those shorter distances. And let's face it, if we removed all of the short-haul flights that occur and only long-haul flights, only those ones that go over a couple of thousand kilometres, if they were the only ones left using jet fuel, that would still make a huge difference to the amount of CO2 that the airlines across the world produce. 2% of all CO2 produced across the world is produced by airlines. So if you took away those shorter flights and replaced them with hydrogen or electric, then I don't have an exact number, but I think you'd replace a lot of that 2%.
With such an enormous population over such an enormous expanse of land, few nations are as energy hungry as China. Local conservatives lobbying for our own solutions have tended to lean heavily into China's reliance on coal in the past when directing conversations for our own current local energy objectives. But that decoy argument is aging like milk when you hear just about how just Chinese are now investing in renewables. Matt, how is China leading the way in renewable energy?
They are leading the way. And this is fascinating because how many people have you heard say there's no point us doing anything, James, because China, they're doing all the damage.
New coal plants.
That's right. So why are we wasting our time with electric vehicles or renewables? Because our bit of difference would make no difference whatsoever to the world. And there is an argument there. I don't think it's a good argument. There's one argument there. I mean, if everyone took that attitude, then no one would change anything.
That's right.
But now that argument is going to fall really flat because China has decided to go. And my experience with China, and I've been over there and experienced some of the local things and the way they're done, my experience with China is when China says let's do something, they do it.
They just do it. Yeah.
Now, one of the advantages, and I'm not touting this as something that I think we should change to, but one of the advantages of a government that isn't necessarily an open democracy, maybe we've got someone in charge and you've got complete control, is that you can say, let's do it, and the rest of the country just goes, okay. In Australia, a government says, let's do it, and they say, well, have you consulted the public? Have you gone down a path? Have you brought everyone along for the ride, et cetera, et cetera? But in China, they don't. And I think of the Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze River, and they said, we need to create something that will create some hydroelectric power. Let's do it here. 1.3 million people had to move out of their homes because they were soon going to be underwater. You might be able to do the same thing in Australia. 1.3 million is a lot, but it would take 20, 30 years of planning, arguments, discussions, a whole range of things before you do it. In China, they just said, we are doing this. Yeah. By the way, your new home, that address, scribble out your address, that return address, it's now over here. So 1.3 million people got moved along. 2012, that was all finished. They've got a 22.5 gigawatt hydroelectric scheme there. Thanks very much. Wonderful for the environment. Not great for those 1.3 million people maybe. But they've now decided, China's now decided that renewable energy, wind and solar we're talking about here, is where they should be focusing, not coal, not nuclear. Now, they haven't shelved those plans completely. They haven't said no more coal, no more nuclear, but they've certainly scaled back those plans quite dramatically. And when they've said go, they have gone. They're installing 10 gigawatts of wind and solar every fortnight.
Wow.
Every fortnight.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's
so
the
they've
switch.
just pulled off the brakes and they've just gone full bore on this.
And the other one that I found with China is sometimes when they've got a problem, they throw people at the problem. So they would just say, right, we need a workforce. Oh, we've got 1.4 billion people. Let's go and create that workforce and then start to make this happen. Now, they've been using the Gobi Desert, so they've been putting it in areas where you've got some space, some area to do this. And then they've built the world's longest high voltage lines to be able to bring the power from the Gobi to where the population is. Some of these towers are 235 metres tall.
Oh, wow.
So they've got just a little bit of height about them.
Crazy.
It is. And so you've got this high power, high voltage transmission lines bringing this. And again, let's go and build these. Let's bring it to where it's needed. Job done. They think they'll have their 2030 renewable target met within months. 6 years ahead of schedule, they'll have their 2030 renewable target. So when they've decided to go, they've decided to go. Now, is this a way for the rest of the world to say, maybe we could learn from this? Yes and no. I think if you can see what China's doing and see how quickly you can accelerate this, absolutely there's an argument there to make it happen. But I still think, for example, we know in the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone, there's a lot of people having discussions with the government about the transmission lines, about the payment for those, about where these might be located. So in a democracy, you do have the community involved in these discussions. So you can't have someone just click their fingers and make it happen. But can we learn from how China's doing it in other ways? I think we can probably learn a few things. And it's all government-led rather than individual private industry. We're relying on a lot of private industry in this nation to do this rather than relying on the private industry. Maybe governments could get more involved. Maybe governments could start building some of these and then once they're up and running, start selling those off. Even just with the building of transmission lines, EnergyCo in New South Wales is building them, but they've already contracted that out to a private company to actually do the physical construction. Whereas I think in China, just go and do it yourselves. We're the government, we can do it all. One of the things that's helped them certainly is in the last decade, utility scale solar PV has dropped by 81% in price. So that starts to make solar very attractive compared to what it was only a decade ago. Yeah. So things are happening, but they've taken action. So all those people out there now to say we shouldn't have to do anything because China's
not doing
nothing.
Well,
and China is
wrong.
responsible for a third of global greenhouse gases. So if they can do this, that makes a huge difference. That doesn't mean we can now say, oh, we don't need to do anything because China's doing it all. I think it's a global effort we need.
That's right. Of course, one of the biggest problems in working in public hospitals around the world is that you're never receiving people at their best, but rather quite often at their worst and most needy. It pains me to see the signs in hospital reminding people to be kind to staff, but it's clearly a necessity. Which brings me to the topic of our next story, the rollout of a breed of security robots designed to patrol the corridors of hospitals. The Knightscope K3 robot will hopefully bring some peace of mind to hospital workers, Matt.
Well, it should bring some peace of mind to a whole range of different workers, I think. You've got a little robot, Knightscope K3. It's an autonomous robot, 4 feet tall, looks a bit like an egg. It's 154 kilograms. So you've got a fair amount of mass there, and it's designed to go around doing live video recording and live video streaming.
Yeah, so it's hardly RoboCop patrolling these halls and going to bring people to the ground. But
no weaponry on this robot yet, but maybe.
But at least it's got some security cameras. People know they're being watched.
Correct. So it's got 360-degree video streaming, so 360-degree cameras. It's got thermal detection, so it can pick up different heat signatures if the lights go out, for example. It's got two-way voice intercom, so someone can be talking to the robot and you can have someone talking back, and a distress button, so someone can hit the distress button, and purely real life people come and help out. One of the things that the producers of this robot talked about was that there are public misconceptions about robots and the powers they have. And they said, we use this to our advantage because, as you correctly said, it doesn't have any weaponry. It's got cameras. That's all it's got. But people don't know that. And they think of Doctor Who's Daleks, or they think of RoboCop, and they go, oh, I better do the right thing. Look, that robot's there. It could do anything to me. It could zap me. It's got tasers. It's got lasers, whatever. It's got else. It doesn't.
You have 15 seconds to comply.
That's right. So they said many people assume the robots have more capabilities and more aggressive, vicious capabilities than they really do. So they're starting to use these not just around hospitals. And it's a bit sad, isn't it, that we need them around hospitals?
I think it's terrible, but it's just the way it is. And people aren't, necessarily at their rational best.
True.
When they're in a hospital.
And their loved one is more important than anyone else
Bingo.
in the waiting room. And you see the signs up, please be kind to the nurses, please be polite. And I'm thinking, they really need those signs.
Yeah.
But they do, obviously.
They absolutely do.
Otherwise, they wouldn't put them up. So that's an issue. But these are being used already around shopping malls, around parking lots, government facilities, sports stadiums. That's not a bad one, sports stadiums, because you do get people pretty passionate with their sport around those things. Maybe we need them just on the sporting ovals around local environments to make sure people don't get too aggressive on the sidelines.
Yeah.
So a whole range of different areas they'll be used. And I think the nice thing about this is they're really focused on, we don't want to replace humans that might be doing this, but we can make humans more effective. So if you can have one security guard and the cost of a security guard to patrol a shopping mall, for example, but have 2 or 3 of these roaming around, suddenly it feels like there's more security around there. People feel safer. And one person can be covering 3 or 4 different areas just by being back in a control room rather than physically having to get people out there on the ground. Because it's expensive for a shopping mall to have multiple security guards, but unfortunately sometimes it's needed. So if you know that everything's been recorded, maybe you still act irrationally, but maybe you don't think about breaking into that shop or going and stealing some phone that's sitting on someone's bench while they're waiting for their food to come. A whole range of things. Hopefully, people get to realise that there are CCTV cameras everywhere and maybe they shouldn't go and do that crime they might be thinking about doing. So expect to see more robots in general areas in the future.
So interesting. I know people who swear by it, who are devoted to speech-to-text software, but I'll confess I'm still a bit of a speech-to-text version myself. OpenAI are now doing everything they can to bring people on board. So they're offering a free transcription tool with their browser. Matt, the winds have changed. You're blowing hard here.
I remember I've used services in the past with some of my radio segments. Some people wanted those, have transcripts of those. And so I found a service where I paid not a ridiculous amount of money, but it might have been, say, $100 for a 15-minute segment to be transcribed, and the speech was done. It was done by someone in a different language, and so the speech was done reasonably, and most of the things were okay. But I said, have a read over it, and it was all okay-ish, but we're getting so much better now, and we see even on TV, even on YouTube, you can have automatic subtitles. A friend of mine from school used to do that job, used to have the job of typing subtitles to live real-time programs going to air. And I had a good conversation with that person on stage, and it was fascinating. And I said, it must be great for you because there was the news that they were doing. It must be fascinating. You know all the news. And they said, I don't absorb any of it. I'm just so busy trying to listen to what the person's saying and type that at a very fast typing speed, obviously, to get that to come up on screen.
And it is funny sometimes when a word has been misheard and it's completely inappropriate in the context. It just appears you going,
that's right.
Yeah.
And you see that more with AI than you do with a human doing it. So it's been available, but not necessarily to you and I. But now we've got speech-to-text engine from, it's the other way around, isn't it? Text from speech. So speech, yes, that's right. Speech-to-text.
Yeah, speech-to-text.
Yeah. So you've got that done by OpenAI, but you've got other ones. You've got Otter.ai, you've got Google Speech-to-Text API. So you've got a few out there. But the OpenAI one seemed to be pretty attractive. It was free. You basically upload an audio file, and there you've got your text file done pretty much straight away, not immediately, but pretty close to real time there. Not enough that you could have a live broadcast, but enough that you could look at it pretty soon afterwards. But the other thing I thought of is sometimes I'm listening to things to get some information, listening to a podcast, for example. I can read quicker than I can listen, obviously humans can. So maybe having that transcript would be better than having the actual audio they can listen to. Audio is convenient if I'm driving the car, I can't read, for example. Out on my push bike riding, I can listen to things I can't read. But if I'm in the office just trying to absorb some information, maybe I just want to upload that audio file and then listen to it. You can even do it with YouTube. If you've got a YouTube clip that you want to listen to again, you can read the transcript. That only happens at the same time as the audio is coming. You could actually upload to this. You could put in a URL from YouTube and it will transcribe that whole video in one hit. So you can just read what's said on that particular video. So quite fascinating, but available out there for free, available out there for people right now you can use and go for it. Have some fun taking any of that audio and converting it.
It's a new way of doing things. So here's an interesting piece of trivia. If you ask someone to guess a number between 1 and 100, would you know that there's a number that is most commonly chosen by a significant degree? I'll pause for a breath while you think of one now. Now, if you thought of the number 37, then you've just contributed to a very odd sort of statistic. You see, true random number generation is not actually that easy. It's not even easy for computers, believe it or not. Matt, how can we possibly hope for true randomness?
Well, that's a very good question, but I want to go back to what you've touched on there. Do you know the percentage of people that choose 37?
It's something like 60, it's in the low 60s. Yeah.
Percent.
So there is a number. 69 is often chosen, and that's a I'm not going to go into that. 37. When you take away that number, that other number, 37 is the next highest one.
Yeah, right.
And so and it's. And so that wouldn't make sense. If you remove the 69 from the list, then 37 has in the low 60s.
So why? Is there any analysis of why?
Yeah, and it's actually a video on it, created by Derek Miller of Veritasium. So I'm going to throw a plug for his channel there.
Sure.
They go into depth. You can watch it on YouTube, and it's a very interesting sort of thing. And it's all about prime numbers, and it's all about putting things together in a rapid succession in our brains to try to be random. Yeah, right. But in doing so, we're not actually being very random.
Because we're thinking very similar to other humans, because guess what? We're all humans.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I understand computers have trouble being random as well.
They do, and that's so a good segue there. But I didn't know that one about 37. That's fascinating. But true randomness, this is a big issue. And we've needed random numbers for a long time. The first use we know of random numbers was way back in about 3000 BCE, Mesopotamian times, when you had dice. So that was the first time you had some form of randomness, and they used dice, not sure for what, maybe for gambling, but there was a way to roll something. But maybe that wasn't truly random, because you might have had a dice that wasn't perfectly constructed, so one side might have been a bit heavier, so it might have favored one number.
Yeah, but if you're picking up that dice, if you roll it one way and you pick it up and hold it in your hand a certain way and then just roll it again in the same way that you've always rolled it,
how random is that?
Then how random is that?
Yeah, that's right. Someone else picks it up differently, and so they might have a different randomness compared to your randomness. Even back in ancient Greece, random selection was a democratic tool. The way you got elected to public office was through a ballot. So they said that was fairer and had a better chance of equality if people were just chosen at random to be the leaders in Greece. So we've needed random numbers for a long time. Now, most people are familiar if they've done anything in Excel or they've done some programming. You've got a function there. You go in there, you type in the function. RND is often the function, or RAND in some, for the creation of a random number. And you can set up a formula to say, I want a random number between 0 and 100. Here's how you do it. Random number multiplied by this number, make that an integer, job done. But it's not random. And this is the problem. There is a deterministic algorithm in any computer generation like that. And so if you know that algorithm, and obviously someone had to program it in the first place, you know what it's looking for. Is it taking the clock, the time on the clock, a very accurate time on the clock, and using that as a seed to then generate a random number from that? Well, that's not random, because if I know the time on the clock, I can recreate that. Now, that's no big deal. If I'm drawing, I've used Excel to draw the random winner of a draw, and you put up on the screen and hit the random, and you have a little spinner come up on screen for a little bit, and then, there's a number that comes up. I'm okay with that if I'm drawing something where you're going to win a hat out of a box. But if I need a random number to encrypt something, if I'm using that for security, gambling, if I'm using that for gambling, not great, because, and there has been one example I know of, but probably more, where someone set up a little hidden video in a casino and watched one particular machine. And by using that, worked out the process of when that was going to show up a certain winning scenario. So, right, we need to go in there in, 3 weeks and 2 days and 1 hour and 7 minutes, and that's when it'll pay out because I'm watching the process of what's showing up on the screen, and then we know that's where it's going to happen because it's using a non-random random number. So how do we generate random numbers? That's the big question. And there's no surprise about this, nature. So we turn to nature because nature does have some truly random things where there's not some sort of programming or algorithm. Maybe there is, but we don't understand it at that level. So one way we create random numbers is radioactive decay. And there's a thing called the hot bits generator. You can go and look it up. And that uses radioactive decay, and the timing of decay basically is random. So when various decay processes happen, that's when it'll generate certain randomness in the numbers that it creates.
Yeah, so for uranium, its half-life is 4.5 billion years or so, but you might hold a piece of uranium in your hand and a little bit is decaying right now, and then a little bit will decay in another 100 years, So
you've got, and obviously you go back to things that have got a shorter half-life to then generate a series of random numbers.
That's an extreme example. Yeah.
That's right. So you've got that when you also do things like atmospheric noise. So I've seen examples where people have bought very cheap radios, go to an AM station that's not in existence, and you just get noise. We hear noise, but there are different frequencies there. Those frequencies are created by a bunch of stuff in our environment, a bunch of things out of our control, but they're random. So you use that to then pick a frequency to then generate a random number from that frequency. So we've got ways that are used to create random numbers, and they're incredibly important for things like, as I said, encryption. If you've got banking software, you've got any sort of security software, you want to know that you've got those numbers that are genuinely random that are being generated. The real challenge is, how do you prove a number is random? Now, you can prove it's not random because you can say, oh, look, there's a sequence and there's a sequence that's repeated. I know that number's not random, but you can't really prove randomness. I kind of use the example of some mysterious crystal that we keep in this room, James, that keeps elephants away. Now, I know it works because there's no elephants in here at the moment, so that crystal must work. Well, no, I don't really know it works because the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So there's no elephants here, but were there going to be elephants here anyway? Maybe not. Maybe there were. That crystal might be working, may not be working. But the same with randomness. How do I prove I'm generating a truly random number? I can only prove that it's not random, not that it is random. But this is something that computer scientists around the world are continually working on with randomness. And I just thought there was no particular thing that's happening with this story. I just thought it was interesting with so much fascination at the moment and so much importance on cryptography, encryption, understanding the basics of a randomization, some form of randomization to get there. Just to understand that, people might be, I suppose, more fully aware of what goes on behind the scenes to create a random number and then to use that in other things.
Crazy. And just like that, this cookie jar of tasty goodies is empty with a little more than a couple of crumbs left and the smear of a chocolate chip. Thanks for another cracking tech talk, Matt.
Well, I think I'm going to go off and buy myself a Poe talking stuffed toy now.
And just see just how creeped out you get.
Well, just that, and also to help me when I get grandkids one day so I can go in and I can make up stories. Just tell me what characters and what things you want in this story. I'll be back in about half a minute, listen to Poe's story and then go, right, I've got it now.
Or just have Poe in a backpack.
That's right. Whispering to me on my ear, have a headphone in and say, and then next, the character went, what did he do that for? No, sorry, I didn't mean to say that. It's just, let's keep going. So, yes, I find that fascinating. Let's see how good Poe is in a few years' time.
Well, I think I'm going to go off and just cut sick testing some fat random number generators online this afternoon for the gigs. Hell, I know how to party, and anybody going, ain't nobody going to hold me back, I should say. I'll be going off at my place today. Thanks for tuning in yet again to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Here at Tech Talk, we look into the tech that brings only the best futures. If you heard it here, for the best in futures, use only Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. I'm your host, James Eddy, and as you can tell, sometimes I just need to rein it in a little. Be that as it may, we look forward to your company again next week as we present next episode of our humble little homegrown podcast, fresh out of the bag. Hope to catch you then, and don't forget to invite your friends.